Hello everyone, welcome back to the Jump Show. Another week under our belts and some nice performances to look back on, and of course some quality racing to look forward to this weekend with Wincanton and Aintree 2, and a bit of Exeter, of course, Friday's Haldon Gold Cup. Time to say welcome to the show once again to both Dan and Jake. Jake, start with you. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, doing great, thanks, Tom. We're getting rolling now. We just really need that rain, don't we? We're saying it every week now, but it's getting more and more pertinent that we need some rain to start falling. So fingers crossed we can get that in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, there's some very somber moods from the couple of trainers I went to see in the last couple of days. Nigel Twiston-Davies and Kim Bailey, who are really at their wits' end about the lack of rain, I have to say. So hopefully a bit of that to come. But the forecast doesn't look great, to be perfectly honest. Dan, it'd be nice to see a bit of precipitation in the air, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's somewhat ironic that Let It Rain didn't win yesterday. I think that kind of sums it all up, to be honest. As you say, the forecast is worrying, especially if you're looking towards the Cheltenham November meeting. I think there's a bit of rain due from the early forecast towards the end of next week, like around the Thursday. But, I mean, by then, you're going to need a decent amount. So it is becoming a bit of an issue, as you say.
Yeah, big time. But that's not to say we haven't actually got a few decent fields for the weekend's racing. So there's that upside to at least think about for sure. Before we get started, though, on the podcast this week, I'm delighted to say that we have 2 pairs of tickets to give away for Greatwood Sunday at the November Cheltenham meeting, courtesy of Unibet. That is 2 pairs, so 4 tickets. My maths is once again absolutely bang on. But if you want to get involved, Jake, how might you do that?
Yeah, in order to enter, all you have to do is like this video, subscribe to The Jump Show, and then comment down below Cheltenham November.
And the winning entry will be chosen at random on the Monday of the 11th of November. So please be sure to enter. And also, please be sure to check the comments that you've posted, because that's where we'll be replying to those who have won. So please keep an eye on that. That's where we'll contact you and we'll get those tickets to you, as long as you do indeed respond to our messages.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled, everyone, and come back to the comment section as much and as often as you can. Indeed, to the video to relive this wonderful 45 minutes or so. Let's move on, shall we, to the last week or so, those 7 days, a recent notable performance from both of you, if you will, starting with you, Jake.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to be going to Wetherby on Friday. Obviously, they had their 2-day Charlie Hall meeting. And on the Friday, there was the listed juvenile hurdle, the Wensleydale juvenile hurdle, where Static made his debut for Ollie Murphy. And it was a very eye-catching run. He was a dual 3-year-old hurdle winner at Auteuil when trained in France. And he joined Ollie Murphy in October, so quite late on compared to how, when most horses joined from France, to continue his juvenile campaign in Britain. And he opened up around 9-4 the night before for the Wensleydale race. And despite opening up a fairly short price and having quite an attractive profile for the race, he drifted out massively all day. Ended up going off 14-1, which obviously was very alarming for anyone who was on. And having dropped out in last place, however, he pulled himself into the lead, leaving the back straight. So already he's used quite a bit of energy at an early stage of the race. And despite that, he still jumped beautifully down the home straight, got in a long, protracted battle with the favourite, Liam Swagger. And in the end, he was just beating a neck. It was a really, obviously, eye-catching performance and a good performance on his debut for Ollie Murphy. He probably is a horse who would like a bit of softer ground. All his form in France obviously was on softer ground. It was pretty fast ground at Wembley on Friday. That definitely suited the winner, Liam Swagger, who come off the flat. But Liam Swagger has been given a rating of 125, and Static has now matched that rating of 125 in the latest BHA round of handicap amendments. So he could be one for the Boodles, come the spring. I think there's plenty willing to do with him on some softer ground, between that time, however. And yeah, it was a very nice performance from him on his debut.
Good stuff, Jake. Yeah, you're always a man who keeps a close eye on those handicap amends, aren't you? As soon as they come out, Jake is on it like a hawk. Once again, a very good case made. Dan, what about you last 7 days or so? One to watch.
Yeah, this is going to be a contentious one, which stirred up some interesting topics of conversation. So the horse is Cap West, not Cap Quest, which he really should be called. It's got the strangest name you'll ever see, and was probably given one of the stranger rides you'll ever see as well on Wednesday. Classic Chepstow maiden hurdle. The dialect after this was pretty interesting. I mean, if you're being frank, the horse was never really put into the race, not given a winning chance really at all. Admittedly, he's a headstrong character. He's quite keen. He had bits of form last season and had a bit of an injury between his last two runs. He was third in the Chepstow bumper behind Captain Bellamy and with a second to Valgrand of all horses in May. It was actually one of my williest ones to watch at the start of the season. Travelled pretty powerfully into this race. It was a slowly run affair. Royal Infantry on the front end started to quicken. It wasn't really ever asked a question. The only time he was really asked a question was after the last. He jumped the last, basically upside two others. As soon as he was really just asked to go and find something, he found 2-3 lengths really easily. I don't know if everyone was watching the same race as me because there was no steward's report, which I found baffling because this was clearly not a horse who was given the full effort. And also the Racing Post comments were basically just saying, yeah, just stayed on strongly, probably wants further. I was like, what race are you watching? Like, this horse had so much in hand still. And he's ultimately got a very big engine, so he's definitely one for your trackers. Harry Fry, JP McManus, he may be one for handicaps later in the season. That was his second run over hurdles, so I think technically would be eligible for a mark because he's actually placed in both his hurdle starts to date. I think maybe needs a bit more experience to really show the full effect of what he can do, but he's clearly got a lot of ability. And on a wider point, this did spark a lot of debate about expectations and how horses should be ridden. I think Let It Rain also sparked a similar conversation. Now, I don't think you can really expect, and no one should expect, novice hurdlers, bumper horses, early part of the season to be fully geared up for their first run. It's just unrealistic. And part of the betting in those events is understanding expectations and particular trainer trends and how far forward horses are going to be. But there's seemingly quite wide-scale agreement that not even attempting to win a race or achieve the best position is now almost an acceptable and good practice. And to me, that's a worrying development. I think it used to be one a bit too far the other side, in which case any horse that seemingly wasn't given everything, the game was corrupt, the game's gone. Now it's almost seemingly just accepted that a horse can really actually not be given the opportunity to achieve the best result. And it's now a tip of the hat job, well done, that's a great bit of training. Because at some stage you then are basically getting into the realms of public schooling and not actually racing. So I think we need to be careful about what the levels of almost non-trying we accept are, because we've seen it a few times recently. And by all means, I don't expect every young horse to have absolutely geared up for every race, have a hard race every time. But it is a race, and they do need to be racing. And if we then just start accepting that horses aren't there to try to win a race, I think we're on dangerous ground.
I've got to put horses from last week, haven't I? That would be Clap of Thunder for Nigel Twiston-Davies. Part of the reason because, of course, I've been there last couple of days, and they really like him. But they've always really liked him. They said that, and they thought he'd be much better than he's shown so far. And they were really pleased with his victory at Ascot on Saturday in novice company. It wasn't the strongest race in the world by any stretch of the imagination, but he couldn't have done it much easier. And I think the big thing for him is it's a confidence booster, and his bumper form was pretty smart on occasion. And I think if reproducing some of that over hurdles, which it looks like he might be about to do now, then I think we could be talking about a pretty decent novice going forward. So, interestingly enough, Sam Twiston-Davies actually said to me that of all the 100 horses they've currently got in the yard, that Clap of Thunder was the one they had highest hopes for last season. So I think that's a pretty high, not accolade, but it's definitely something should be.
It's a big statement.
Yeah, it's a big statement. Let's move on to the weekend, shall we? And of course, Friday's big race is the Haldon Gold Cup. Jake and I had a nice little chat when we were there at the Devon track last year. I won't be there, unfortunately, this year, Jake, but are you going to go?
I'll be there, yeah. Yeah, I'm a regular to the Haldon Gold Cup. So, yeah, I'll be there. Looks like a decent race this year.
Yeah, it doesn't look too bad. My initial take on it, Jake, was that there could well be quite a bit of pace. A few of these like to go forward, and it might help one held up. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I can see that. Obviously, all the money has come for JPR1, hasn't it? Who is a horse that I've been a fan of in the past many times. I didn't really see why there was such a gap in price. I think it might be shortening now, but the gap in price between him and Jello at the time when I first looked at the race was quite big. And I'd be keen on Jello to have a good chance here for Venetia Williams. Obviously, she's only had a handful of runners so far, but she did get the win at Ascot on Saturday with Matador. And Jello was just a really nice horse last season, wasn't he? Obviously, Dan ended up putting him up for the Turners, where he ran on for third, ran a good race that day. But he's ran some plenty of good races before that as well. He won his first 3 starts of the season in sort of novice handicaps, going into Grade 2 company for the Noel Novices Chase over 2 mile free furlong. And quite interesting, he was sent off 9-4 favourite to beat JPR1 in the Grade 2 Lightning Novices Chase at Lingfield in January. Now, obviously, Mattard had completely other ideas that day and completely took him out at the start, which is not ideal for gauging the form. But Jello was trying to give JPR1 £5 that day. He now gets £2, so he's going to be £7 better off that horse, and this time he's a much bigger price. So I think there's plenty to like about Jello. Obviously, he's good, fresh. He won first time up at Exeter the season before in a 2 mile 1.5 furlong. 2 mile 2.5 furlong handicap hurdle. This 2 mile 1.5 furlong trip is, it's a bit odd. You don't really see it in many tracks, do you? But I think Jello has the speed for 2 miles, as he's shown in winning over 2 miles, and he's got that extra bit of stamina that you sort of need to get home at Exeter as well. Having won over further and over a similar trip at the track. So yeah, Jello would be the one for me. I think he's got a great chance.
Okay, great stuff. Yeah, I'm sort of with you, I'm afraid, Jake, with Jello, just because I mentioned that pace potential up front, and it could be Etalon, Sombre, he likes to go forward, and of course JPR1 does too. So half the field like to go forward. So I think there could be a little bit of a burn up. The one that I wanted to mention, Dan, actually as well, who I think has got a decent chance now. He's had that run behind him, is Scarface. So I think it's quite a big price for the Cobden Tizard team. Tizard's horses are in decent nick at the moment, but he had some pretty good handicap form last season at his very best and looked progressive in the main. He had obviously disappointed a bit on his comeback, but he might well just have needed that. If he does come on for it, he's got a nice racing weight. Harry Cobden's got the rides, and I can see him running a good race.
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, it'll be, I imagine, the outside of the field. I think a few of these probably have more up potential, really, when you're looking at it. I'd agree with you guys on Jello. Obviously, there's a few in here that I have a bit of a relationship with. Etalon was obviously a bit of a success story for the handicappers to follow last season. I think we're still learning about him because obviously he won a few pretty ordinary handicaps and then was in a grade 1, so we don't really know where his ceiling is. I think on the pace angle you mentioned, Bully, I'd say Jello will be one of those to go forward. If you look at a lot of his runs, his best performances have been when ridden handily. He was ridden pretty aggressively in the Turners. Obviously, he, Grey Dawning and Ginny's Destiny got into an engaged battle for pretty much the entire race, and they remained the front three. Ultimately, I don't think he has the absolute class of those two, and probably isn't the strongest of stayers over 2.5 miles. So I think the kind of trip is actually going to be pretty ideal for him. I imagine Sam Brugge will probably try and go forward, but all his best form is on a lot more testing ground. I think the likes of Cheltenham, I think JPR1 will be probably ridden fairly patiently. I think he likes to come from off a pace more than make it. Cheltenham will probably just be there for a bit of a spin round before going back to Newbury, which I will then back him for because he absolutely loves Newbury and big galloping tracks. But yeah, Jello for me would be a pretty strong selection, really. I know Venetia's barely had any runners, but Jello has a fantastic record fresh. Beat Master Chewy first time out last season in a race that worked out really well. So yeah, it looks like we're all in agreement, which only ends badly.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't end really well last week, did it?
No.
With Secret Squirrel, but we're going to go for it again anyway. Let's move on to Saturday, shall we? And it's Banjo Beers Day at Wincanton. Also got the Elite Hurdle and the Rising Stars Novice Chase. So a really good card in prospect. No rain, Jake, again. So quick conditions for all these horses to handle.
Yeah, and that's kind of the small concern I've got with my selection, Larchmont Lass, for Paul Nicholls. Obviously, it feels like every single year you can make a really strong case for a Paul Nicholls mare in the Richard Barber Memorial race. He's won it a couple of times, but he has had a lot of flops in here as well. That is something that you do have to bear in mind. But Larchmont Lass, I think she's got a really good chance. She was a really good bumper horse. Obviously, she ended up winning a listed race at Sandown in her first season in bumpers. They started out in the listed bumper at Cheltenham November meeting last year. She finished fifth of 15. It's a decent run. But things didn't really work out for her over hurdles straight away. She was beaten at Taunton twice. But then when she finally did win, it came at Wincanton on some pretty decent ground. It was good to soft that day in February. In the Hood, she went on, stayed on strongly over this course and distance, 2 mile 5.5 furlongs, and won by 2 lengths. So, at least she's got that in her locker. She then went to Newbury for the Grade 2 Mares limited handicap final, and she ran a great race there, to be honest. She was in 4th, and she was only beaten half a length by Betty. And Betty is a horse that I would have been all over if she ran here. Unfortunately, she looks like she's going to Sandown on Sunday instead, which is a shame. But yeah, having got that piece of form behind All the Glory, who obviously reopposes here, and Alfie's Princess was in that race as well, that looks pretty decent to my eye. And she even went off favourite when stepped up to 3 miles at Ayr at the end of the season in April that race where Willie Mullins sent a couple of crossover. She finished fifth. She probably wasn't quite ready for 3 miles that day. I think the drop back to 2 mile 5.5 furlong is going to be what she needs. And as I said, Paul Nicholls in the Richard Barber Memorial, you can't go wrong. So 7-1, I think she's a decent option.
Okay, good case put forward. It's very competitive, I have to say, that 145 on Saturday. Dan, do you have a fancy? Is it the same as Jake's or something else?
I love that. Paul Nicholls can't go wrong, but about a minute before that, you mentioned all the times it did go wrong. Exactly. Can't go wrong, except for all the times it did. So it's a very tricky race. And to be honest, I think the theme of the weekend for me here is it's going to be pretty small stakes and a few each way plays. I think this race is very tricky. I think others will touch on. I feel likewise. I did pull a rabbit out of the hat last year with Good Luck Charm in this. I think it won at 18-1. So I'm trying to almost do the same again. I say it wasn't a massively confident selection then. It's not going to be this year. And the one I'm going with, I think, was 25-1 pre-Dex, was Greyval. Fergal O'Brien, Jonathan Burke, only runner and ride on the card. Was a very useful juvenile a couple of seasons ago. You look at some of her form on good ground when she was beating Arclight, who's obviously gone on to make that look pretty strong now. What was actually running quite a big race in the Grade 1 at Aintree that Zenta won a couple of seasons ago. Error 2 out didn't help, still ran pretty well. Only went off 16-1 for that race as well. So 16-1 for a Grade 1 race at Aintree as a juvenile filly. I mean, clearly she was held in some regard, but last season was not ideal and never really is for 4-year-old fillies going into open company, pretty much forced into big handicaps against the geldings, which made life difficult. Started off in an Ascot race, the 2-mile handicap at Ascot, ran respectively. I think it's just now a case of putting her up in trip on conditions she'll now appreciate. She's often found herself on testing ground, which hasn't really been ideal. That was the case last time at Stratford on heavy ground. Clearly a mare that needs good ground. On tight tracks, I don't think are ideal. You look at her best form, it's all on good ground. It seems to be better on more galloping tracks. She's one of the likes of Doncaster. So I think it's definitely worth a go up at this trip. She was dropped £7 for a few runs last season down to a mark 114. I say some of her earlier form does make her look well handicapped on that. Breeding wouldn't suggest she'd like the trip, but to me, she just looks like a proper galloper. It definitely looked the case a couple of starts ago at Market Raisin, where all she did was stay on from off the pace. So in a very open race, I think she's an interesting one of the big prize, say the only runner for the duo on the day. I think she's worth a bit of a play at 20 or 25-1.
Okay, not convinced by Good Luck Charm again. He's also in the race once more.
No. I mean, she was very well handicapped last year. She dropped because of a load of bad runs over fences, and I think Ante-Post won the race with a very similar type previously. And to be fair to her, I didn't really expect to do anything after that, and she was very consistent, a decent level after, which I think has not left her the best handicapped, to be fair. So she could run well. She's got conditions pretty much in her favour, but that race wasn't the deepest last year. It looks a bit stronger this year as well.
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't fancy anything particularly strongly in this, but I did like the way that Mermaid's Cave won at Bangor last time. She's okay on good ground, good soft. It's okay for her. She'll be fine under conditions. And that came off a 123-day break. And she clearly benefited from that. She had quite a busy summer. And she looked in good nick last time. And Callum Pritchard taking off the £7 leaves her very nicely handicapped. So I'd be interested in Mermaid's Cave, who will come with a late run. And could be just picking up a few pieces late on. Let's move on, shall we, to the 223. It's the Boodles Rising Stars Novices Chase, a Grade 2. Just the 5 runners have been declared for this. Dan, comes straight back to you.
Jake will come to an interesting stat on chasing debutants in this race, which I know he's researched, and other people have subsequently found the same stat, and it really annoyed him earlier, which I took really great pleasure from. I will just highlight Glyn, who might be breaking a record as the first horse ever to have previously run in the last race being in a veterans race, and then turns up in a novice chase the race after. But generally, how good is National Hunt Racing? You wouldn't get that anywhere else. That's like literally like it's turning up in a 4-year-old race on the flat and then turning up in a juvenile race the day after. Superb scenes. The one I would like in here was Insurrection. I thought he probably shaped the best of any Paul Nicholls horse at the Chepstow meeting. Obviously, couldn't match Springwell Bay, but as I said a couple of weeks ago, that was Springwell Bay's ideal conditions, decent ground, first time out. Has a brilliant record fresh, and ultimately is a very classy horse on his day, and he showed that there. But Insurrection jumped really well, will undoubtedly improve for the run. That was kind of said before, and Paul Nicholls has a very good record of bringing horses on from that particular race and going on to win this. So, Nappers Hill did it last year. So while he has a bit to find on the ratings, I do think he has plenty of upside, and I would take his chase experience over potentially the more flashy profile of handstands at this stage. I mean, his current price of 3-1, I think that's pretty reasonable, to be honest.
Yeah, won on the same card last year, didn't he, over hurdles? So I'm sure they'll be hoping he can do similar.
Good ground, big thing for him as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I remember last season, I thought, yeah, he's going to go on to be a decent horse. Didn't quite happen, but he was pretty consistent, wasn't he? Hopefully more to come this year. Jake, what about you in the race?
Yeah, I mean that stat that we've all been waiting for with bated breath is that no Chase debutant or horse having their first start of the season has won this race since 2007. So 16 renewals a horse has had a run before winning this. And amongst those who have tried in recent years are McFabulous, who was sent off 4 to 5 favourite, and Arpeig Delane as well, who was sent off 13 to 8 favourite. So, two pretty high profile horses have come into this making their Chase debut and have got beat. If you ask me who the best of these will be at the end of the season, it'll be hands down, no doubt. But he's 7 to 4 favourite, making his Chase debut in a race which it doesn't normally seem to work out for. And also, it's on some pretty quick ground. I think he'd be happy enough with, a bit softer ground as well in the future. So I'm happy to take on handstands on this occasion. Like Dan, I'll be with Insurrection. He ran extremely well considering how the yard were going at Chepstow, finished second. And this was actually the same path that he took with Nappers Hill last year. Finished second in that listed race with Paul Nicholls and then came here and won. And it's the same route as well that Captain Tomcat did in 2021 and Reserve Tank in 2019 as well. So it is a well-trialed route to get to the Rising Stars, finishing, beaten at Chepstow, but then coming here. As Dan said, this has always been the plan for Insurrection as well. Even before that Chepstow run, this was the race, outlined for him to go to next. And hopefully he can put his fitness, jumping experience, and love for good ground to good use here.
Okay, great stuff, Jake. Thanks for that. Insurrection for you both. Yeah, I wouldn't have a huge view on the race, but I'm looking forward to seeing Soul Icon again. He's a horse that I really like. Kieran Burke's been in great nick over the last few weeks or so, and is actually best in the weights on ratings. So if you're a weights and measures person, then you might.
He's one of those painful horses that always seems to get beat when I'm on him, and then wins when I'm not on. So he'll probably win on Saturday.
And this race can go to just a handicapper who just somehow the race falls into his lap. Seen it a few times. It wouldn't be 1,000,000 to 1.
Okay, let's go on, shall we? To the Elite Hurdle. It's the Grade 2 on Saturdays. Only 4 runners declared for this. That's Rubo, Aspire Tower, Brentford Hope, Surely Needs Soft Ground, and Forever William. We had a bit of a chat about this before we came on to do this recording about Forever William. Dan, you were making quite an interesting comment about this one.
Yes, I mean, in theory, great bit of placement because you get nearly $4,000 for finishing 4th. However, if you do look at the BHA rules for this race, let me just quote verbatim from the BHA admin site. For 4-year-olds and upwards, which are allotted a rating or an assessment of 120 or more by the BHA handicapper, taking account of races run up to and including the day prior to confirmation. Now, if we quickly have a look at Mr. Forever Williams' rating, we will see the number 119. But somehow he's still in the race. So he shouldn't technically be allowed to run. I guess we'll see if they let him. I mean, otherwise it's just a $4,000. You've just disappeared into thin air, which is really harsh because I mean we do need horses just to fill the races. I mean, otherwise, it's embarrassing enough as it is. I mean, we can't even get a 4th one in there just to collect some scraps of prize money. That really is a damning state of affairs. But yeah, so that'll be the interesting subplot, I guess, going into this race. And who would have thought you'd be saying that about a horse rated 119 as 100 to 1?
Could be one for the old tweet machine, that Dan. Try and get something stirred up.
It's just such an easy nibble though, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that to Paul. To be fair, if it's a lot of work in, I think it'd be really harsh, to be honest, to just let him run.
As far as the race is concerned, I've got no real view on this apart from the fact I think Brentford Hope won't like the ground. I think he'll need it softer. Therefore, Rubo should win. That's just my view. Jake, what about you?
Yeah, obviously Rubo will take a bit of beating here. He prepped with that win in the listed hurdle at Kempton the last day. This race was an absolute joke 12 months ago. That was even worse than this renewal. He only had to beat Hansard, who's rated 140 that day. So, yeah, it is a bit of a better contest this time around. And he did have to be shaken up to beat Quijada the other day. Quijada did look like he had a chance coming towards the last, didn't he? So I think I will take him on, give away the maximum penalties. Brentford Hope won't be where I land, as you say, Tom, because he probably does want softer ground. But more to the point, Harry Durham said he's an absolute nightmare to get fit in a recent stable tour. He said, I hope that will be ready for the elite hurdle at Wincanton, but everything needs to go right between now and then. So clearly enough has gone right for him to turn up. But in that stable tour, he was mentioning the Kingwell hurdle as pretty much his season target. And that would obviously make sense. The same course and distance, but a lot softer ground in February. So Yeah, I'm happy to leave him, and I'll take a chance on Aspire Tower. To be honest, he's already rated 148, which is above Rubo, and it feels like he's been around forever. He's ran since the juvenile days, but he's still only 8 years old. In his previous time, he was second in the Triumph, second in the Matheson, fourth in the Champion Hurdle. I mean, he would be absolutely massively odds on, wouldn't he, if he was running a couple of years ago? 902-day absence due to injury obviously doesn't help things. They went chasing with him last season. He did okay in a couple of races. Probably didn't go to plan as the connections had hoped. But he returned to hurdles at Punchestown last month. He won a conditions hurdle over 2 mile, 2.5 furlongs. And he actually turned over Pied Piper that day, who's rated 153. He fell at the last, but he was well beaten at that stage. That looks like a decent enough run for his comeback. As long as he doesn't bounce here, then I think he's got a great chance. Hemorrhage Bromheads obviously wouldn't take this tried and tested route of going to the elite hurdle with his horses, but he spotted the prize, he spotted a weak race. Why not take a chance on him? He's rated 148, he has no penalties to carry because his last Grade 2 win was back in 2020, so obviously it's way before the cut-off for any penalties to be picked up here. And yeah, if everything goes right, he's got Darragh O'Keefe aboard, and he likes good ground. 2 miles is his trip. He's got a lot in his favour.
Yeah, fair enough. Couldn't argue with any of that, to be honest, Jake. Dan, would you agree?
It's a fair case. I mean, I'm surprised. I'm trying to look at his price. Obviously, we're recording at basically 1 p.m. on the Thursday, so prices are a bit up in the air. I mean, I can see 13-2 in places. That can't still be right, surely.
It's kind of like 9-2 across the board, but Bet365 has stuck their neck out on 13-2, yeah, which is obviously,
and they've gone really
price.
Short on Rubo, so they're. I mean, of 13-2, I think you kind of have to have a bit of a play on that because that's just the wrong price. If I can still get that a bit closer to time, I may well just have a bit. Otherwise, I don't really have a strong view in the race. One, I'll just let run and see what happens.
Yeah. Okay. Much more competitive, at least numbers-wise, is the Badger Beers, the feature handicap on Saturday at Wincanton, the 3:30. Been some good winners of this down the years, of course, off big weights on plenty of occasions. And at the moment, the market leader or joint market leaders are the Changing Man and Lord Accord, 2 horses we know and love here on the Jump Show. Jake, let's start with you, shall we, for this very competitive handicap?
Yeah, it was a bit of a up in the air whether the Changing Man would come here, but he has turned up. And I definitely want to give him a chance. Obviously, the horse that myself and Dan flagged last season as looking very well handicapped. He began his season finishing second to Stay Away Fay at Exeter, where he looked like he might win it at one point. And then he unrode in the Grade 2 Eschenof's Chase as well, where he again was still not out of it when behind Stay Away Fay that day. So they were 2 good runs. His career, his season, just completely collapsed at that point, though. I don't think he liked the soft ground at Warwick in January. And then he ran like 2 weeks later at Exeter, which I don't think was obviously the right move. Very disappointing when sent off 5-2 favourite for a race at Exeter. But on his final run of the season, I think Connections finally found a weak enough race for everything was in line off mark of 126 at Uttoxeter, and he went off 3-1 favourite and just got beat by Regal Blue. Very annoying. I think Connections was very frustrated he got beaten that day. But he's off a mark of 130. He's had the wind surgery. I just think there's still more to come from him. I think he'll be fine on this better ground. I think Jotizard was a bit worried if it's too quick for him. But I think he'll be fine. I think Wincanton's probably a good track to go. Obviously, Jotizard has his string in good order at the moment. I think the Changing Man is probably where I'll end up lying. The other one in the race that I thought was very interesting is Lord Baddesley. Mm-hmm. He's a horse who last season definitely came on for his first run, but he's moved to Anthony Honeyball now from Chris Gordon, which I think is probably a bit of an upgrade. I quite like Anthony Honeyball, especially around Wincanton. Obviously, he won the race here last year. He's off a mark of 129. He was very well fancied for a 3 mile handicap chase off that mark at the end of last season, but the race ended up being void. So he obviously didn't get to see what happened that day, but he was very, very well fancied in the market. I think off a mark of 129, I think there's definitely scope for him to win a race this season. Obviously, he ran really well in the Peter O'Sullivan Memorial last year, and maybe today's not the day. Maybe it will be a future target for him, but he's definitely a horse I'll be keeping an eye on now, changing trainer.
Okay, I'm going to go just before Dan and say I quite like the claims of forward plan here. I think I might have put him up for the race last year, actually, but he finished 6th and then went and won on my birthday a few weeks later. But
Did you back him on your birthday?
Obviously not.
There we go.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I remember it fondly.
I have
but
no patience for those types, though.
Yeah,
Like the ones that let you down when you're not on there, and then just the moment you need a bit of a boost, they kick you while you're down. You've got more patience than me, mate.
yeah. Well, I just thought he had a decent chance here if he's fit. That's the big question. He
Yeah.
wasn't fit last year, so hopefully be fit this year. And that's my main aim, because I think he's very well handicapped. I think he's going to come on again as an 8-year-old. He was very consistent in this kind of race last year. I think around about 12, 14 to 1 is a pretty decent price about a horse who's very, very able and proven in this kind of race. It just depends if he's fit. So hopefully he will be. But as you say, Anthony Honeyball's all scored a little badly in there. So we shall see. Dan, what about you for this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't think it's a great handicap by any stretch of the imagination, which kind of leads me to my selection. But firstly, this is the weekend preview of strange stats or tidbits I'm picking up. So I think this might be the highest percentage of runners I've ever seen in a race who have a tongue tie. 90% of the runners have their tongues tied. The big breakaway being the only one who's letting it roam free. So that's just something I thought was interesting. And he's typically outside of the field, so maybe that's something to pick up on. I don't know. But the Changing Man, he's so obviously well handicapped on bits of form, but just does he really want to go and do it, is my concern with him. You look at he's been a big improver, obviously. I think he's been a bit of a slow burner, but his 3 hurdles win came off marks of 95, 102, and 109. And ever since then, he's just been climbing up the ranks by running well and then just finding ways to get beat in races he should be winning, which would concern me. Great to see Lord Accord back and enjoying races. Obviously, a horse I have a bit of an affinity for. Obviously, last time the race wasn't really a race. He just got out in front and nothing really ever looked like they were going to catch him. It kind of leads me to the fact that those two are the head of the market. It's not the greatest of races. So I'm going to take a chance at a big price again. Like my previous selections, it's not a massively confident shout. It's one of those where it's a small stakes weekend for me. But I think Al Dancer at 20 to 1 is just the wrong price. Like, that seems a bit insulting, even though he's nearly as old as I am. But he was a credit to himself and Sam Thomas last season. Only bad race came at Sandown towards the end of the season, where he made a few uncharacteristic jumping errors. But his record fresh is phenomenal. Breaks of 120 days or more. Record reads 1-1-1-1-0-1-0-1. The times where he's down the field came in the Paddy Power on the top of him. This is a far cry from those. Look, his mark 154 clearly isn't great. It doesn't leave you much wiggle room, but as I say, this isn't a vintage race by any stretch of the imagination. He was a second in a very good handicap last season at Kempton off mark 152, with Dylan Johnston taking £5 off. And the form of that obviously does tie in with this race, because Forward Plan won it, then went on to be third in the Aintree handicap. Phlegmatic was fourth, who had his absolutely ideal conditions, obviously Kempton specialist really, and Sam Brown was fifth, who won the next time out at Ascot and then was second at Aintree. So that is a solid piece of handicap form to take into this race. You mentioned Callum Pritchard earlier, Bully, when you were looking at, I think, the mare's handicap. He takes £7 off here. Big weekend for him. He's obviously had a couple of winners in recent weeks as well, and seems to be getting a lot of support from a variety of trainers, ridden for Ben Pauling, Neil Mulholland, John McConnell, Philip Hobson, Johnson White in recent days. Obviously, Sam Thomas giving him a chance here. So if you take that £7 into effect, he's effectively off the same as he was when he was running in that Kempton race, which I think bodes well. He's £3 better off with Forward Plan as well. And ultimately in this race, Wincanton tends to be a front runner's track, especially on good ground. You look at all the last renewals of this race, I think at worst you want to be prominent, and he will be one of those who goes forwards, probably with Lord Accord, who he'll probably give plenty of company to up front. Look, he is ultimately 11. You have to kind of question how many races there are for him, but we know if there's any trainer who's capable of getting one ready for a target, it's Sam Thomas. I think they would have thought this would have been a good opportunity to get, if they can, one last big win into him. Ultimately, his mark isn't a gift, but I don't think it will have to be, and he's got the run style to at least give you a run for your money.
Right, that's Wincanton done and dusted. Let's go on to Aintree, shall we? A couple of races to preview from there. And it wouldn't be a jump show without having a look at a Pertemps qualifier. And that's what we're going to look at with the 130, a Class 2. And it's attracted 9 runners. And at the moment, the market leader is Just Guard the Moon, looking to make it a hat-trick for the Twiston Davies team. Dan, come right back to you, shall I, for this one? And you got another old boy in there, Sam Thomas, Stolen the Silver.
Yeah. I mean, okay, I'm not gone completely insane. I'm not just backing all old horses at massive prices. So let's calm down. I mean, at least 9 runners is better than the 4 runners we have at Aintree today. So, you know, every cloud in that. Not a race I'll get massively involved in. I thought the most interesting one was Magic King. Still think there's mileage in his mark. Was a decent form last season as a novice hurdler behind the likes of Peaky Boy and Champagne Twist at Cheltenham. Ran some good races. Still think there's some scope on that mark 119, especially up to 3 miles, but I won't be having a bet in this race. It's just 9 run-up attempts qualifiers, good ground. Christ.
Yeah,
It's a struggle.
Yeah, really tricky. The only one that I thought was actually quite interesting was Bold Endeavour on first start for Laura Morgan, because he's become decently handicapped on some of his best form, including a third at Newbury this time last year, when only beaten just under. Well, actually, it was 12 lengths in the end, wasn't it? But
I was looking at that number. How are you going to dress that one up? Just under
cigarette papers.
For some reason in my head, I had it. I remember him running better than that, but it's still decent. It was still a decent effort. And he's lower in the handicap now. He's £2 lower, I think, 141. So yeah, I just need to see what she can do, because obviously he's come from Nicky Henderson, and you'd say that generally they wouldn't improve, but maybe just needed a change of scene. He's not always been the most straightforward, and it might just be that he wants some new surroundings potentially. But yeah, I'll be interested to see what he can do. Drop slightly in the weights, but he wouldn't be a strong fancy by any stretch of the imagination, particularly in a race like that. Jake, what about you?
Yeah, it's actually his return for Laura Morgan, because he was with her before he went to Nicky as well. So very interesting to
hopefully not an old friendly face will do him some good.
Exactly, yeah. I would be most interested in Harbour Lake here. Went over fences last season, just absolutely hated it. Let's be brutally honest. Ran back at Kempton over hurdles in March in a pretty decent 2.5 mile handicap hurdle where he was 5th behind Boom Bourne. Then he went to Cheltenham for the 3 mile handicap hurdle on April. Was second off a mark of 127, only just beaten by Zane Knights that day. He was then beaten by Zane Knights again a bit further this time at Haydock off 129. Obviously, Zane Knights was an ultra progressive horse last season. I think he won 4 races in a row in the end, or 3 races in a row. He's now rated 130. You know, it was some good efforts to try and give him quite a bit of weight on both occasions. Obviously, likes good ground, 3 miles, a much easier race off 129. I think he'll go well. The interesting one is Williston as well, off 126. He won that Haydock 3 mile handicap hurdle the year before, off a mark of 126. He's back down to his last winning mark. Mark Wolford knows how to get these horses winning again. So he ran a pretty promising race behind Pretending, who's favourite for the Richard Barber Mayor's Memorial race that we were talking about earlier as well. He ran further behind her the last day. So if he can bounce forward, then he's an interesting horse at a big price. But yeah, Harbour Lake would be the one I would land on here.
Okay, good stuff. On to our final race to cover then on the Jump Show this week. That is the Grand Sefton. Always a good view and a good watch. And I'm going to go first this time. It's as simple as King Turgeon goes from the front, doesn't see another rival, and just wins. Had a wind up before his last run at Chepstow when he absolutely bolted in, and that was over 3 miles too. Good to soft ground is what he wants. He's obviously up in the weights massively now. He's gone up 11 pounds, but he was vastly superior last time out. And you'd think on that outing, given the fact he's had a wind operation, there could easily be more to come this season. And the one angle I really like about him is dropping back in trip. Often the Grand Sefton can be a bit of a stamina test, but not in the way it used to be. Now that they put the fences down and made it a lot safer, which obviously is a good thing. But with that in mind, that extra stamina over this trip, could see him go from the front, and I think he just might be a little bit hard to catch from towards the bottom of the weights. And hopefully under a £7 penalty, meaning he's £4 well in, he's going to be a tough horse to beat. I think there's plenty in his favour. Jack Tudor on board. Dan, come to you second for this race.
The theme is going to continue with small each way bets to those who are carrying a lot of weight and have a bit of class, and I just think the circumstances suit them, and that's Authorised Art, who's obviously was a pretty good horse for Willie Mullins without ever being his star. Grade 3 winner, was second in the Galway Plate a couple of years ago. His last run for Willie actually came in this year's Galway Plate, where I think he actually ran better than the bare result, because anything ridden prominently that day finished well beaten. It suited those that were held up, which is a bit unusual for Galway, but that's the way it panned out. And again, it's more of a circumstantial bet, like a lot of these early seasons ones are. You're looking at a combination of the prep, the ground, what the run style suit, the situation, and is the price reflective? And I think in this case, Authorised Art is still 25 to 1. I think that's a big price. He had a nice little prep run behind Roubaud the other day. I think this has clearly been an early season target for him. And because he's quite a forward going type, good ground, we've seen that pay off so many times over these Aintree fences. I expect him to be ridden pretty prominently. Unlike a lot of those above him, like he's got that race fitness on his side, and clearly they have aimed him at this race. I think it came out of Stable Tour that this has been a bit of a plan since they've got him. Yeah, I just think at 25 to 1 for a horse who has a lot of class, he's not exactly a gift mark 153, but sometimes I feel these early season races, when you're up against a lot of other exposed types, I'm not sure it's always about how thrown in are you. It's about how ready are you to give your running. And I think he's probably more likely than a lot of these.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, I think. And arguably, the most fascinating run of the whole weekend, will he be ready to run or not? Potentially, is Harper's Brook first start for Dan Skelton, having, of course, been with Ben Pauling, a horse who we've seen throw away so many races and then finish
Woof.
second, having looked to have put the race to bed, including at Ascot last year. Will Dan be able to find the secret to him, Jake? That's the question.
I mean, if he does, then he's a genius, isn't he? It would not be for me. I'll be taking the top weight and one of the bottom weights. So yeah, I agree on down on Authorized Art. He's made a good case there. Had the prep run. Think he'll go well. Caelan Quinn's obviously taking off £3. Good rider. And then the other one I like at the bottom of the weights, I'm surprised you haven't gone for this one, Billy. I thought this would be right up your street, is Gabriel for Oliver Greenhill and Josh Guerriero. Obviously, the team that cannot be stopped in Tom's eyes. They did have Gesgilly, obviously, in this race the last 2 years. Obviously, the sadly ill-fated Gesgilly. He was second here in 2022, and then he won the race last year. Gabriel is actually a very, very similar profiled horse in the fact that they both started their career in France. He won 5 times there, and he was actually a next second in a listed hurdle at Pole as well. So he's got some he ran to a decent level there. Came over to England in the rating, sorry, of 120. He had to run off some fairly decent marks in his first season. I think he was a very slow burner. He wasn't like Gesgilly in the fact that he came over and just started cleaning up, but he ran in some Hunters chases off those marks. Probably needed that first season, but Oliver Greenwell said in a stable tour last year that he just came back a completely different horse, and obviously that's exactly how it transpired. He won back-to-back races at Kempton and Doncaster, and then he nearly made it a hat-trick at Ludlow, where he was third, only beaten half a length by Tide Times. Obviously, they were some good efforts. You brought him back up to mark of 122. Then in March, he went back Hunters chasing and absolutely bolted up at Catterick in a race where actually Percussion, who obviously reopposes here, was well behind. That was a good effort, and it set him up perfectly for a tilt at the Fox Hunters in April. And he took to the fences really nicely, jumped around perfectly, got to the Canal turn, and just with that inexperienced rider on, just had a really soft unseat. Like I think a more experienced rider probably would have been able to hold on there. It was just unlucky. He still ran around riderless actually after that and ended up finishing the race in front, having jumped every fence. So take of that what you will. But it does show that he does like the fences. He's also won twice since in Hunter's Chase at Cheltenham and Cartmel, because he is a horse that connections think like a bit of better ground. They were soft ground races, but they were in the spring, obviously, where spring soft is a lot different to soft in the middle of the winter. So a horse who likes decent ground, a horse who likes the fences, is off mark of 127. He's having another spin around Aintree. I think he's going to go really well. And Henry Brook is obviously taking the ride this time. He's going to be a much more experienced rider and know exactly what to do with him. So yeah, I think a decent each way price, he's got a good chance as well.
Okay, I obviously wish them all the best. Renal. I just thought I can't fancy every horse they run, so yeah. Good luck.
Oh, you have so far this season, so why change the habit of a lifetime?
I got to try and make myself look like not 100% plonker.
Tough job.
Great stuff, guys. That finishes off our race previews. All that's left is anything else for the weekend. There's always a fair few that you both have looked at. So, Jake, we'll come to you first.
Yeah, it is actually quite a tough weekend. It's one of those weekends where I didn't really have many in my tracker, to be honest, which is quite unusual for a Saturday, that's for sure. But I've got 3 for you. One of them might be quite short, but we'll see how that goes.
Didn't fancy anything, but still got 3.
No. It's just tough. It's just tough to find bets. But choose a copper in the 1242. Obviously, he'll be an automatic bet, having won on his handicap chase reappearance. Looked really good that day. He's only gone up £4 in the weights. He's running in the 1242 at Kelso. Looks a weaker race than last time. Obviously, the form was boosted by the second winning last weekend as well. So he'll be an automatic bet. The one who probably will end up being too short is Deployed to Spy in the 315 at Aintree. He just looks by far the best of these for Ollie Murphy. Doesn't look a very good race whatsoever, so I'd imagine that he will be quite short. But if he's 2-1 plus, I'll probably end up having to go on him. And then in the 322 at Goran, there's a horse called Glen Kiln who's in my tracker. Looks like a very nicely handicapped horse off a mark of 116. He was last seen at Fairy House in February, where he was running in a handicap hurdle, and he was sent off 5-2 favourite that day. Looked to be going quite well, and then 1 length down and fell 2 out. So He drops back in trip to 2 miles on some quicker ground, which is probably the main question mark. But Brian Hayes has been booked rather than the claimer Carl Miller that has ridden in the last couple of times. So they obviously think he's decently enough treated off that mark like I do. And yeah, I think he'd have a good chance in that race.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on all three of those then, Jake. Good stuff. I'm just going to go very quickly before Dan. Looking forward to seeing Mr. Meggetts over hurdles for the first time on Saturday Aintree. That's in the first race. Keep an eye on that. My biggest fancy of the weekend comes in the 205 at Aintree. That is Imperial Saint, Philip Hobson Johnson White. He was I thought he was pretty emphatic last time at Aintree, beating a horse called Petit Tonnerre, who clearly was on a going day and ran like it, but still found Imperial Saint too good. Imperial Saint still sneaks into a 0 to 130 over 128. Course and distance winner last time. So conditions absolutely fine for him, likes the ground. And his biggest danger in the market at the moment is Hunter Legend coming back from Venetia Williams, who I think just really needs soft ground. So I'd be pretty keen on Imperial Saint winning again to make it a hat trick. And he's got race fitness on his side as well. Dan, what about you?
So just to confirm, of all the races we cut off the running order, that 2 mile handicap chase was the race we cut, and it was the race you had your strongest fancy in. That wasn't done intentionally, I swear. That was just
I didn't even realise it was cut.
Yeah, it was. I tried to preview it. I tried to preview it, and I just came to a no-bet conclusion. I mean, that race had Jello and Master Chewy in it last year, so I mean, it's got some build to live up to, and my God, it's not going to do that. There are a lot of slow, exposed types in that race, so anything with a hint of progressive profile in there is going to be pretty short, I imagine. Like Jake said, tough weekend. A few that I've catch my eye. I'm going to mention this horse every time until he runs. Jack Black runs in the first race at Exeter on the Friday against Captain Bellamy, who I thought said they need to go left-handed, and yet he's running Exeter. So let's just assess why exactly that's happening. I'm not sure. I'm hoping actually might be a decent price because Hijack's in there as well, carrying a double penalty. He's obviously race fit and been in good form. So I think Jack Black is a very good long-term prospect. They won it with Deafening Silence last year as well. Keep an eye on the price for him. If he's anything reasonable around the 5 to 2, 3 to 1 mark, I'll have a bet on him. Sunday at Sandown, a few interesting ones. Tin is in a conditional jockeys race over 2.5 miles and the 2 mile race. I think he's one who has improvement in him once he steps up in trip. Wouldn't really have him in mind for the 2 mile race. I think that's a bit deeper. But if he does step up in trip, I think he's an interesting one. And the novice handicap chase is fascinating because Nicky Henderson's got 3 who could run in here and would be very short prices in Jericho de Repene, Iberico Lord, I think Peaky Boy. The one a bit lower down the weights, if none of them run because the ground is pretty good, they might not, is Buxy Day as Pierre for Venetia Williams. Did pretty well as a novice hurdler last season for the yard. But as Adam has hammered into us, French recruits, Venetia Williams, over fences, they tend to improve. I expect him to do so on a mark 121. He's another one to watch out for. But again, I'm not sure if he runs. But if he does and none of those big Nicky Henderson horses are in there, I think he would be a very interesting prospect.
Great stuff, guys. Loads covered this week and looking forward to the racing immensely after all that. Please remember to like and subscribe, and also remember to comment down below with Cheltenham November for that ticket giveaway. We've got 2 pairs to give away for the Greatwood Hurdle on Sunday of the November meeting at Cheltenham, so do please get involved. We'll be back next week to preview that exact meeting, all 3 days of the November meeting at Cheltenham. But until then, from all of us here at The Jump Show, it's farewell.